Rough, chapped hands close around something alive. He says, "Trust me," and I'm not certain I can. A mouse captured under a hay bale would nip my finger. A sparrow trapped against one of the sunlit windows in the barn would flutter my heart. Sometimes he even surprised me with death. An aborted calf the size of my fist, or a still imperfect salamander that traced the lifelines in my own hand. Odd wonders. Dad was steeped in life-giving wonder, hatching baby chicks under light bulbs, drawing warm baths for newborn calves born into cold gutters. He observed the veterinarian cleanse the prolapsed uterus of a Holstein that had cast her withers once, maybe twice, then mimicked the major surgery. The cow survived. A yearling ran through the haymower and Dad stitched its leg with common needle and thread. It healed. I can hear a voice from a late-night infomercial. "Vet isn't home, no money to pay, no problem. Dr. Ray is on call 24/7 and eager to assist with your large and small animal medical emergencies. Call 1-800-MILK-COW. Of course, there were casualties. All the more reason for the practice makes perfect cow labs. Some of the cows lived to see another milking. Others never recovered. Skyliner, a registered dam and our #1 milk producer, gorged herself on a lush third-cutting alfalfa, lay down in the dry bed of the creek bottom in the North 40, and bloated. Us kids had been assigned the task of keeping an eye on the animals that day, and thus carried the bulk of the blame and the guilt for her demise. That day we were all barefoot and t-shirt free, running through a warm, soft rain that fell on the well-traveled lane, slip-sliding and giggling and skidding through the greasy clay. Puddles collected in the depressions like milk after a bowl of cereal, and with denims rolled to just under the knee, we flirted with the water that soon wicked its way to our waists. We were free, gloriously free, and behaving like, well, a bunch of goldarn kids. Our dog, Puppy, caught a bird in full flight that day. Puppy was a dog that needed Ritalin, in part because of his identity crises. Neither he nor his littermates were ever named, but responded collectively to the chanted chorus of, "Here, puppy, uppy, uppy." Ritalin would have been a good name for him. He spent entire summers galloping after meadowlarks, bobolinks, and red-winged blackbirds, yelping incessantly except for the day Skyliner died. That day, Ritalin vaulted heavenward with all four paws, doing hang time like a frisbee dog, and clamped his jaws around a rain-soaked meadowlark in mid-flight. I told Dad about Ritalin catching the bird, eager to release such farm-worthy news, and also hoping to pull Dad's attention away from Skyliner's peril. Dad listened as he pulled his dull hunting knife from its cracked leather sheath, stroked it against a whetstone until it cut paper, and said nothing. He let go of his silence as we waded through the wet knee-high alfalfa. "I thought I told you kids to keep the cows out of the third cutting." I squirmed inside. "We did," I responded. "You did? Then how come Skyliner is bloated and lying in the creek bed?" There was nothing more I could say or do. The cows had strayed across the lane that divided the mature pasture and the fresh alfalfa. As we neared the creek bed, the rest of the kids and the cousins, who had formed a crescent moon half-circle around the white animal with the black markings and one pink eye, parted so that Dad could approach her. They too were silent, except for bold Cousin Rick. "Hey, Uncle Ray, Skyliner's bloated." His comment sounded stupid, an emergency room announcement of the obvious. "Yeah, she sure is," Dad said. He closed one eye and squinted with the other as he laid his ear down to her chest. She wheezed like a beached whale. Dad straightened and handed me the foot-long stainless plunger and the anti-bloat pill that was darn near the size of the meadowlark Ritalin had just caught. "Here," he said to no one. "It's too late for pills." I grabbed at the plunger, hoping my helpfulness would alleviate my guilt. Instead, it felt like an anchor in my hand with my prayer of, "Please God save this cow and I will never," chained to it. Dad drew the knife, located the apex of the extended stomach somewhere in the front of her hip, and aligned the tip of the blade. "Can I do it, Uncle Ray?" Rick asked, leaning over his shoulder. "No," I blurted out, angered by the preferential treatment that he might receive. "No," my father said. He didn't echo me, but overrode me, and eased the blade through the white hide with the black blotches. Red droplets formed, and the pressurized gut hissed a green juice. The Holstein wheezed a deep foghorn breath, and then her breathing went shallow. At that moment I knew we had failed in our assigned task, that our best cow would die and be fed out for dog food until the ripe stench of her decaying body became too strong to ignore in the humid August nights. Ritalin broke through the circle, leaned in, and cautiously lapped at the blood and juice. Dad turns toward me, and without making eye contact ordered me, "Go take the rest of the cows back to the barnyard and grain them for tonight's milking." I hesitated, fearful of speaking, the pill gun plunger pulling me to the bottom of the hayfield sea floor. "Here, give me those," he said, and reached towards me. I released them into his waiting hands. "Can someone help me?" I asked. "Dave, Dick, help your brother. Girls, go watch the road. Take Bill with you." Rick stayed behind, peppering Dad with questions as Ritalin skulked around the cow's rump and then nipped her by the base of the tail. Dad booted him and he limped after me. When time had eventually muted Dad's anger, he hooked the tow chain to the tractor and dragged Skyliner down the same lane we had played on the day she died. It was now sun-baked, asphalt hard, and Skyliner's rigid body stuttered over the ruts. Us kids were given chores to complete, a final penance for our sins of omission, while Ritalin accompanied Dad to the only hill we had on the farm, the sands of Calvary. Because I've been there before and witnessed a cow burial, I know what happens. I know a father's thoughts. He's still angry, mostly at himself, and he lowers a blade on the back of the orange Chalmers WD-45 and works it back and forth, clutching, shifting, and accelerating, working his thoughts in unison with his tractor. He doesn't find neat, distinct layers, but enmeshed golden sand that seems to have no end, and when he has scraped a hole worthy of Skyliner, he finds a vacuum where his anger once resided. A lonesome grief overcomes him, and he reaches out to Ritalin, the dog he never named, and sits with him on the edge of the hole and is miserable. His misery trickles from him like a line of black ants marching over the gold sand until even they tire, and that is when he begins to pray again. For his wife, for his children, for his children's children, and for the milk check that will soon be dropping off with fall pasture round the corner and one less cow to milk. Somewhere in his mix of emotion, gratitude is offered up for the life of Skyliner. He kneels beside her and removes a silver chain with the red number tag from round her neck, clangs it onto the fender well toolbox, and climbs back onto his tractor. When he sits down, he feels the spring in the seat like a kid on a pogo stick. He is a new man. He fills the hole carefully, man and mechanical animal tractor working as one with an innate knowing that they mustn't leave any trace of a grave. Ritalin chases the front wheels of the tractor until Dad idles down and dismounts to silently wind the tow chain around the blade. Dog flops onto the cool, clean sand, panting in time to the four-cylinder engine. Dad climbs back on, points the tractor back towards the lane and the cows who will milk yet that night. Ritalin, dog, jogging alongside. It is when they cross the bridge at the creek that the sands of Calvary shift, and a silent flick of sand reveals the tip of a rubbery hoof pointing at the first star of the night. Once over the bridge, Dad starts singing one of those old Baptist hymns he would coax my mom into playing for him after Saturday night chores, humming when the words escaped him. There's the wonder of sunset at evening, the wonder as sunrise I see, but the wonder of wonder that thrills my soul is the wonder that God loves me. There's the wonder of springtime and harvest, the sky, the stars, the sun, but the wonder of wonders that thrills my soul is a wonder that's only begun, a wonder that's only begun. I'm busting a hump to get out of the locker room and onto the ellipse machine before anyone else hops on, because there's only one of them. Usually I move about at a pace that allows me an awareness of God's presence and purposes, but today I have things to do, places to see, people to meet, and it's all scheduled in my head and written out in my planner. As I get ready to exit, a fairly large framed man with a reddish-brown beard stands in my path. His head is cocked to one side, and he is speaking into a corner in the hall ceiling as he answers a question that the health club facility manager has asked him. I'm slightly irritated by this slightly unkempt, out-of-shape, bearded, supersized boy man. He begins to sweep a red and white cane before him and nearly whacks me in the ankles. I glide past him and hop onto the ellipse. Accompanying each stride is my mantra for the day: places to go, things to do, people to see. Places to go, things to do, people to see. And then the blind guy shuffles out of the locker room, poking and feeling his way over to the treadmill. He begins a thumping rhythm of Nike on rubber moving mat, and our conversation begins. 6 months later, it continues. Make God laugh. Tell him what your plans are for the day. There's no such thing as coincidence, only God's timing. Pull out all the rabbit in the hat cliches you've got. Long story short, Kevin Reeves is a phenomenal musician, blind since birth, who just happens to have a recording studio in 3 weeks on his hands between the end of a songwriting workshop at Martha's Vineyard and his upcoming move to Nashville. Need I say more? Kevin would never tell you he's blind, and you will forget that you have ever identified him as a blind person once he turns on the lights for you and orients you to the studio. He manipulates 3 different audio-enhanced keyboards and identifies cables and wires by touch. He will speak about the hottest book and the latest movie he's seen, not because he wants your cited approval, but because he is a vital human being who, while on a recent visit to New York City, made 3 subway changes to visit a friend while the rest of his cohorts went sightseeing. When I set out to purchase my first ever contemporary Christian cassette tape 15 years ago, I did not sing and I did not play guitar. I told the salesperson I liked lyrics that had something to say. He took me over to the rack and handed me a tape by Bob Bennett. I plugged it in, enjoyed it, and bought another of his recordings a few years later entitled Small Graces. My mom walks in my house one day to the music of Bob Bennett in the background and asks me, "Is that you singing?" I was flattered, considered taking credit, but assured her it was not her son but an artist by the name of Bob Bennett. 4 years ago, I took up the guitar and began writing music, of which Kevin Reeves has never heard me sing a single note. Following our locker room discussion, we met at his studio and interviewed each other for the purpose of this recording. He played me music he had recorded of himself and of others, both original works and cover tunes. As we finalized our agreement and I prepared to leave, Kevin said, "Just a minute. There's one other guy I want you to listen to. For some reason I think of you when I think of this guy. You ever heard of Bob Bennett?" Kevin was not only familiar with Bob Bennett, but could play and perform every song off of Bob Bennett's Small Graces CD. And my point? That's the way God made Kevin Reeves, and that's the way God planned it all.